Good evening and welcome to Alive, brought to you by Lupin and conceptualized by Medwiz. Alive. Are we all really alive? What is it that keeps you alive? What is it that keeps our doctors alive? What is it that gives them purpose to go on day after day? Alive is really about saluting our unsung heroes, our doctors and our healthcare professionals. Alive is a platform to bring to you real life stories, the numerous sacrifices made by doctors, the numerous encounters that they have with their patients, the connect that they bring to their patients' lives. It is about stories of every person whose life they have improved or have saved. It is about positivity, about those who put their heart and soul into what they work. They work for humanity and so much more. We all believe that working as a doctor is very, very challenging. Yes, keeping the interest of the patient above all. We bring to you first-hand account of what really goes behind the work of a doctor, the back-end story, the behind-the-curtains heroes, the endless hours of work that they put in to save lives, and so much more. Every day we see doctors go beyond their duty calls. They see so much pain, and yet they change lives for the better. As we bring to you our real-life heroes, let me now extend a very warm welcome to Mr. Yatin Thange, Group Product Manager, Lupin Pharma Limited. Yatin, what a pleasure to have you here in this live interaction with me.
Isha, a very good evening to you, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Yatin, our audience has so been looking forward to Alive. So I would love for you to share with us what is it that the thought of Alive came to all of us right here.
Sure, Isha. So it's a very interesting question, and the name itself signifies why this is. So, for example, if you see when a lady has a baby inside her, okay, when she's pregnant, so there is a life inside her, and what happens after that is she first goes to one person who's known as a doctor. Why? That is because they want that this life which has come into existence has to be taken care by someone who has the experience and capability of bringing that life alive into this world. So that's why the meaning alive is. And if you see the disasters, what has happened across, you see a lot of rescue team working around. But there is someone who works behind the curtains with only one agenda and one motto: to keep this patient alive. So to celebrate that, heroes this platform.
What a beautiful example that you started with. The first connect of life is done because we have our doctors working for us. And the way that you started on this very positive note, I'd like to ask you, with so many webinars happening all across, what is the first reaction that you got from the medical fraternity when you spoke to them about Alive, creating this platform? What is the first thought and the click that you got from our doctors out there?
Yes, so there are so many programs going on, and if you see, all the programs are like say a symposium on robotic surgery or symposium on revision fractures or etc. etc. But when we started marketing this, I got a call from at least 5 to 6 people who talked about how he goes into landslides and he does all this work. So he was really keen on attending this program and learn from Dr. Oberoi, Dr. Suchar. One very interesting message I got from a big orthopedician of India, and so when he saw this, he actually messaged me saying that he was a part of the medical rescue team of the Pan Am hijack which happened in Karachi, where this famous movie Mirja is based on. So he was part of that, and he worked there. So he was also so keen to see that something good is happening and something different than this usual webinars are happening.
Very rightly mentioned by you. So there's a lot that we're going to bring for our viewers this evening. And as I thank you for joining in, Yatin, we would love to bring some live pictures out here of some beautiful moments that have been created by in very, very challenging times, as we've seen frontline workers work towards achieving so much more for patients, for victims. Bring to you some very heartwarming pictures of doctors and our various frontline workers really rising to the occasion time and again. Here we go. People's faces. Yatin, as we look forward to this session and so much more, to present our formal welcome address, may I please introduce to all our viewers Mr. Pradeep Sachdeva, Senior General Manager, Lupin Pharma Limited. He comes with an experience of over 31 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and he has been instrumental in bringing Mayo Clinic program for Indian orthopedic through Lupin. A very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, Isha. It's really a privilege and honor for me to be part of this Alive, to organize these or associate with these programs so that we bring one of the best things for our Indian doctors. And as you have rightly said, there are so many things which has been happening in last 2 years, and we have seen pandemic like once in a century thing, and we know the contribution made by so many doctors. I think no words can express or explain the contribution made by them. I know I keep on seeing we are all Bollywood, I would say, followers. We worship the heroes, we build temples of those heroes who actually are on screen. We made them politicians, we made them build temples for them, somebody becomes chief ministers. But actually I feel today, and it is real, doctors are the real heroes. Like they are always behind the screens and untiringly, without any selfish motive, they keep on trying to save one single bit of life. That is all about our unsung heroes. And I think Lupin is very, very privileged to associate with Medways and Alive. And I think we are lucky that we could get the time of Dr. Oberoi and Dr. Souchak to be with us and share their experiences, which could be heartwarming, which could be like a lot of informations which could be there for all the orthopedicians who are seeing this program from the length and the breadth of the country. Like I know this program is getting broadcasted live to Northeast. We have doctors from Kerala, everywhere across the country. The doctors have joined us, and everybody is looking forward to hear from Dr. Oberoi and Dr. Souchak their experiences. Real experiences, life-changing movements which has happened. Thanks, Isha.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Sachdeva. And like you very rightly mentioned, this evening is all about saluting our unsung heroes. It's about really bringing about real life stories. And as we look forward to a very interesting session, I'd like to ask Yatin once again, what do you think of our expert lineups here? We have doctors and viewers tuning in from across the country. What do you have to say about how they can look forward to our session?
Yes, Isha, if you see the speakers, Dr. Oberoi and Dr. Suchat, both are at the top of their field. And recently, Dr. Oberoi has been also awarded with the Shiromani Award. And I've read his article on him, the Sikh triumph, which really I was amazed and inspired by that. So I am sure all the young surgeons, those who are currently listening to this show, will definitely get learn that when they're in that situation, what tips, what tricks, or what ways you can do the surgeries when everything around you is not there. And to explain that, Dr. Suchat and Dr. Oberoi are the best speakers for the other.
Thank you so very much, Yatin. And let us now open our conversation with two veterans from the healthcare fraternity. A very warm welcome to Dr. IPS Oberoi, Head Orthopedics and Chief Joint Replacement and Arthroscopy, Artemis Hospital, Gurugram. I'd like to extend a very, very warm welcome to him. He has in the past worked with survivors at Bhuj earthquake, Samjhauta Express bombing, various railway accidents, to name just a few. Just like Yatin mentioned, very recently he has been the recipient of Bharat Shiromani Awards amongst many others. I'd also like to mention here that he has been working with victims at war zones. I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to Dr. Anil Suchat, Medical Director, Suchat Hospital, Mumbai. He has carried out relief work and treated survivors at Latur earthquake, Kutch earthquake, worked in various flood-affected areas amongst many, many others. An advocate when it comes to organ donation, really keeps the spirits high with his positivity. Thank you so very much, both of you all, for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have both of you right here this evening, right, to share those tips and tricks. Like we mentioned earlier, we look forward to learning from you. We all believe that you really push your limits. You've been working in extreme conditions with no operation theaters, out of your makeshift tents, no reliable power supply, no modern technology to really depend on. In fact, even without your everyday regular medical teams to assist you. So what is it like this? I'd first like to come to Dr. Oberoi. You've been a part of the medical disaster specialist team at the site of Samjhauta Express bombing. What was it really like to deal in a situation like that with so much mass destruction, attending to patients in merely a second to decide what action has to be taken on which patient, and moreover, to see so much pain and distress at the same time?
Thank you, Isha. I think Samjhauta Express blast was one of the very bad disaster which happened on Indian soil. It's a train which runs between India, Delhi and Lahore, and it has got an international implications. And we pretty cold and chilly in Delhi, and there was a big blast which happened close to midnight in a station very close to Panipat, close to Delhi. There were two bogies which were laden with explosives, and they went off. Most of the victims in this train were Pakistanis eventually, and so this everything was quite sensitive in a way that medical help and relief had to be reached in question of minutes. We were immediately informed by MEA, which is Ministry of External Affairs, as well as being in Ministry of Railways at that time, to be mobilized midnight. And because from Delhi to Panipat, in midnight, it would take just maybe an hour and a half. So we took around 65-70 minutes to reach to the accident site. We went by road. We had as much as relief material, which is usually packed, which we carried. In the meanwhile, the relief train also started from Old Delhi railway station to reach to the venue and the site of the accident. Honestly, it was chaotic. The disaster had, it actually started with a blast in 2 bogies, but it had actually spread, the fire had spread to 8 bogies, and amount of casualties were enormous. It was midnight, it was chilly. We hardly had any support systems because villagers came in, they chipped in, they brought their lanterns at that time, and in the midnight lanterns, with help of the engineering team and the villagers, we were the first responders at that time, and we were able to evacuate the burnt victims of the train from the train out from the bogies. That itself was challenging. There was another challenge in this train. Because this train is an international train, so most of the windows were barricaded because they don't want people to jump out of windows and maybe create issues of immigration and stuff like that. So it was all barricaded. People had difficulty to evacuate themselves. Burn injuries were quite a lot in this unfortunate accident. A lot of suffocation injuries happened and a lot of mangled extremities. So people were bleeding and they were disfigured. A lot of bodies which were evacuated were beyond recognition. So it was really a very bad night at that time. We had to set a temporary tent, and villagers again would help. They whole of the village in minutes, and local administration chipped in. We had army unit from Ambala, which was very close because it's a cantonment area, which ran in. Army and railway engineers broke the train compartments, cut the train compartments, and evacuated as much as resources. We mobilized it from civil hospital. So there was a couple of staff from civil hospital, and the team from civil hospital reached, I think, within 30 minutes or so. And everything was on a war footing. But the amount of chaos which was there, nobody were in the spur of movement knowing what to do, how exactly to go ahead and do it. And then we had to quickly triage. So that's a medical term where we identify which one need immediate relief, which one can wait, and stuff like that. And we were able to start relief within around 20 minutes of reaching to that place. It's a wayside station. It's not Panipat itself. It was wayside, so you had to actually go area where it was both sides were all crops and agricultural land, and we were able to set up some relief tents there. Because of active involvement of the local administration, we were able to give first Safdarjung Hospital. Safdarjung at that time had a very good burns unit. It is still one of the renowned burns unit in India. And because MEA was involved, all the ministry, including railway minister and external, involved. So things were activated in a very fast mode. Though we understand that reaching from accident area to Safdarjung would have taken around 3 hours or so in such a chaotic circumstance. So as a first responder, it was our responsibility to do the best which we could have done in that golden hour. It's a golden hour is a term in the medical fraternity that's the time when you can take the patient out of crisis. If you just wait for things it deteriorates. So that, Isha, honestly was a really very unfortunate night. And the victims were both accident victims, suffocation victims, and more important were burns victims, because there is a huge amount of burns which were happening. Indians as well as Pakistanis.
You know, now that you're talking about it, I can already feel goosebumps, and I wonder what a job, what a brilliant job all the frontline workers would have done at that point to really bring the victims to safety. Like you mentioned, there were so many challenges that you had at hand, who to transport first, who to respond first to, and merely spent few seconds to really decide on. This is what takes me to my next question, which I'd like to raise to Dr. Soojak. Sir, you have been at the site of major flood-affected areas where people are dying, they're really losing homes, they're losing livelihoods. Really, if we think about it, they are losing everything that they build in their lives. At such point, when you see them sort of hoping for that another life to hold on to, how challenging has it been for you and the teams working at flood-affected areas?
Yeah. Thank you, Isha. It's a pleasure to be talking to you today at the platform of Alive. I would like to mention first that during any relief work, you are not ready, because this is absolutely sudden. Either it's an earthquake or it's a flood. We have to work with whatever medical supplies we got. We cannot expect the facilities of a hospital in a place where there is earthquake or something like that. So we have to manage with absolutely minimum things. And you know what I had the experience was that the energy comes automatically, organically. It's fantastic when you are on a mode of helping the victims of either earthquake or the tremendously. I would first start with Latur. It was 1993. You know, when we got the message that there's a big earthquake, I remember it was the 26th January. I was on a school platform giving a talk, and then the earthquake vibration came. And then I was told by my wife that there's a big earthquake and, you know, come back home fast. So when I reached home, we decided to travel from Bombay to Latur immediately with a team of doctors from here. And in about few hours, almost like 12 to 14 hours, we reached Latur. Latur was very drastically damaged in the sense the houses had collapsed. The people staying there had absolutely, you know, compressed with the walls and everything. So when we reached there, we realized that we need to look for a place where we would put up our tents or work. On the way from Latur to Killari, Killari was the most affected place. So we were told, go to Killari, there is not enough help. And when we reached Killari, we saw some people putting up tents. As soon as we talked to them, it was being put by the army. So I spoke to the commanding officer. Okay, we are a doctor team and I run a hospital in Bombay. So how can we? He says, please join. We need manpower. We need doctors. We had surgeons. We had orthopedics doctors and about 6-7 people and 2 ambulances. So the relief work started right there at Latur with the army. And we almost worked for almost a month over there. First was to identify patients who were very serious and who had multiple fractures and who could not be managed to be operated in those tents. So we had to shift them to the civic hospital. Civil hospital was there about 15-20 kilometers away in our ambulances. First stabilize them, then send them there. Other patients with minor injuries, we could manage over there. But it was such a draconian this thing. Lot of children, lot of women, they were brought out dead from the rubbles of earthquake. So it was, you know, very, very ghastly appearance, and all the villagers were working. The government help was still not there. Army people and the surrounding villages who were not damaged that much, they all came for the rescue, and the work started gradually of shifting people from there. And then after almost we shifted those patients who needed operation at the civil hospital. Our surgeons, our orthopedic surgeons, they were operating day and night, 24/7. You will not believe we had to collect bottles of blood because there was no proper blood bank. So we managed to set up we had a pathologist who would check the things, and, you know, at that time we did not do all those tests of hepatitis and all, and just collected blood because we wanted to save the lives. So all those people who were in hypotension or lost a lot of blood were given blood, Hemaxil and other injections, and we could try and help we could save many lives over there. But the scene was very bad, and we realized the civil hospital there did not have the ICU. So when we finished our relief work, I came back from Bombay, collected funds, and we set up one beautiful ICU for the local people there. That was at Latur. In 2001, in the earthquake of Kutch, we were near a place called Bidada. We went to Bhuj. I knew some collector at the central government, so I spoke to him. We have a team of people, we want to help, so how do we go? So he said, you first reach to Bhuj, meet the collector, and he will guide you where the help is required. And then we reached the place called Bidada. Bidada had small hospital, but they had no enough staff and surgeons and all. So all our orthopedic surgeons, general surgeons, anesthetists, medical specialists, all, and the way there was almost like 100 villages around, and the patients were brought in those Hathgadi and cart, bullock cart and all, and in bad shape, all damaged, fractures, and absolutely. So we set up those tents, and outside we started giving intravenous fluids, and with all the, you will not believe, I had some interns. They were doing work of the
Ayas.
Ayas, and we were not thinking everything. We had to give part, everything. We changed their clothes, and it was, and again, like working 18, 19, 20 hours. There were no lights. So they had arranged a generator for the hospital, and generator would only work for say 6, 8 hours, 12 hours. Again, give a gap of 1 or 2 hours, would put up the diesel and again start the generator. So that is the way we were working there. And it's unbelievable sight. It's unbelievable sight. There also we had to collect blood from the donors, help the hospital there, and all those. There were a lot of serious compound fractures. Compound fractures means the bones that come out of the skin and all. They were compound fractures. They could not be operated there. So I requested, why not shift them to Bombay? So Indian Airlines, they agreed. They removed the seats of the plane. In each plane, we put 12 patients. Those 12 patients, like in a day, we were sending 2 flights. And I took responsibility of 60 patients in Bombay. I have a hospital here, about 70-bedded hospital. We admitted all those patients here. And all my team here also started working. And it took 3 months for doing all those multiple surgeries. Could be orthopedic, then plastic, and everyone became perfectly all right. When they were fit, we sent them back to Kutch. In the meantime, a lot of people realized good work is being done. So a couple of friends, they sent some donations and all. I realized end of couple of months, I could take up a village to rebuild a village. So I went and met the collector. He pinpointed a village of 100 houses. So we rebuilt 100 houses there. We made a small primary school again and a hall, and it took almost a year and a half. In the meantime, they were given those temporary huts and all, and we provided them ration for that village for about 1.5 years almost. So that work was unbelievable. You have to, feel the pain of the people, and then that compassion which you have to help. We are fortunate to do all this work, and saving of life is most important as far as our profession is concerned, or reducing somebody's pain, even that.
Absolutely. So very well mentioned by you that it's not easy at a point like that. And you also shared a lot about not just working at the moment, but really building on life from there, holding your victim's hand and taking them to the happy end, so to speak. Here, I'd also like to ask you, sir, you mentioned how with very few resources, all of you all work. When communication is not at its best, how are you dealing with various teams at hand, be it army, be it the local government, be it your teams? How are you really connecting to see what is the best that can be done for patients, and what were you doing to make sure that at that point in time you can help the patients that need maximum attention? How were you really prioritizing?
See, 93 Latur, there was no mobile phone. I remember we had something like radio. This thing was there. Those people would go from one set to the other set. They would communicate. That's the way. It was very difficult at that time, and we had to send people by vehicle. But Latur, Kutch was comparatively easier. The mobile phones were still working. Some with the generator they could set up. We had to go to Bhuj to call people, say about 40 kilometers away, and we started getting help and medical also. Those blankets and lanterns and torches and chadars, and we got more help also. we got more volunteers in a couple of days. So that started, so we could divide the work otherwise later on, because it becomes very difficult with less human resources to get to everyone. And I remember a child also who was removed from the house after about 2.5 days. It was almost 1.5-year-old child. And child was crying, dehydrated. He got tired of crying also. And then when they removed, we had to first give IV fluids to, check out everything. There are, injuries and all. And then when we gave some IV fluids and all, gradually that child, came around. We were very happy to see that. So such cases we see in such circumstances. And it's very, very satisfying in a way. But we, as a doctor, feel that the facility of areas, small rural places, are not adequate. In cities we have everything. Towns we have got second, the towns we are still better off. But small villages and all, where there are some primary health centers, there may be doctor, there may not be doctor, but not enough facilities. So we have to move those resources from the cities to that place.
Thank you so much, sir. And at this point, I'd like to bring in Dr. Oberoi. You two have worked with various earthquake relief teams. What was it like when you experienced it, especially if we focus on the aspect of dealing with young children? Children are not easy patients. It brings in the emotional aspect. What is it that you'd like to add on here, the various challenges that you faced?
Isha, in earthquake, obviously children are badly affected, and you have to really work hard to save them. They are young, you want to save them. They recover very fast, and in a triage, always they take a preference over an older person whenever you have a situation like that. The problem is most of the children which you get there are orphans. They don't know their parents. Nobody's around. They are emotionally shattered. They have extremities which are badly broken, mangled. We were lucky that we were able to set up a small operation theatre on spot. We had an anesthetic team with us. And what was better about the earthquake was that a lot of international societies had actually chipped in by the time we moved in. So we had an Israeli group which was actually close to us, and they had airlifted a mobile operation theatre there. So they had their stuff, but we were operating most of the time in their operation theatre. Okay. And that's the beauty of the international collaborations which happen in this area. They forget about all that we are Israelis and these are Americans and these are Indian groups. Everybody would merge their facilities and come up. And they had issues because they were not knowing the languages, and we were lack of equipment. So we were a manpower, we knew language. So if the child or a patient would come in and they was evacuated and brought to us, it was easier for us to operate in the facilities of the Israeli tents. And we applied, I don't even remember how much amputations and fixators we applied there and then itself. Because bringing broken legs which are bleeding badly and then transferring them without support is a disaster. So we had to do whatever best we could have done. And those 3 days were terrible because the surgery was practically 24/7. When you stop operating, you rest for some time, your team member would join in and you would start operating there. The beauty is that amount of relief material which reaches in no time, and that's our country. Lot of people had chemist shops around and they opened their chemist shops. They were not even asking which medicine you want. They said you take whatever you want. So that's the beauty. Lot of people had private cars and they converted into ambulances. So if I said that this has to be transferred out, they would bring their car, see how they can drop the seat down and would transport. So the humanity was at the best. International relationships were at best. And that is what happens. Even in spite of whole chaos which is happening, there was a hope that everybody would come together and would work 24/7 without taking break. There were some times when we were not even getting water to drink, and somehow we came to know that that camp has got some mineral water bottles which have been brought in. And when they were informed that there are surgeons which are operating and they don't have even water to drink, somebody would run there, maybe a couple of half kilometer or a kilometer or so, bring some bottles and give it to us. It was really a life-changing opportunity. I would,
the way that you are sharing the stories with us, when everybody is rising to the occasion without even knowing the person who is at harm, and this is what really is rising to the occasion in the right fashion. And this also brings me to your next question, Dr. Roy. You mentioned how you were non-stop operating on patients, but in a situation like this, and something that all our orthopedics would like to know as well, how do you manage with the little equipment that you have at hand? What are the tips and tricks that you'd like to share with those in the learning phase? What is it that you can tell us about really using to the best of what is available?
So when we used to attend some railway accidents, we were lucky. Railway has got a facility which is called as ARME, which is Accident Relief Medical Equipment Team. So it's an accident relief train which has got equipments, oxygen, it has got first aid stretchers, cervical collars and stuff like that. A lot of bandaging equipment already. And these trains are already stationed at many stations all across the country. All across the length of the breadth of the country. These trains are stationed and they are always ready at just a phone call away. They just start moving towards the accident site. So if there were a couple of incidents when we were a part of ARME, we were called in, we just jumped into the ARME and ARME starts moving. And when we reached the accident site, the train itself is an operation theatre. We could operate there, at least give the first aid. So like Vinny says, don't have patients where the veins are prominent and you need to give them blood. You need to give them fluid. So we need to identify veins. So venisections were done rampantly. We had to apply fixators and plasters. And because these trains had facilities of first aid, so we were able to do that. In areas where ARME could not reach, that was the most challenging area, because then you have to take help of local authorities or whatever material is there. And as I said, lot of areas where there are voluntary organizations like temples and gurdwaras, they bring in food. So food is not an issue. Villages have small chemist shop, they bring in as much medicines and then they give it to you. You use it at your own disposal. So humanity is at the best, but yes, resources are limited. And I would agree to Dr. Anil that India needs to formalize what railways has formalized. It's an accident relief areas or trauma zones which should be identified all across the country. And basic trauma infrastructure should be in place. Wherever such disasters happen, in at least 50 miles of radius, there should be some facility where you can go in and off and give the first aid victim. Because as I said, probably golden hour is something where the first responders have to really work. Once that part has been taken care, long-term rehabilitation is something which can be taken care at a larger or a bigger center. But at the ground, it's your first responders' work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oberoi. I'd like to take something from what you just mentioned, and I'd like to ask this question to Dr. Suchak. When it really comes to disaster management, which is a very essential component of medical training, do you feel that our country is giving apt attention to training of health care professionals? What do you think we can really bring about the changes that we must work towards?
See, Isha, first of all, I want to mention that when we did our graduation and post-graduation, there was no disaster management at that time. Recently, in last few years, they have started in the subject of preventive and social medicine one chapter, which is not adequate if you ask me. They have to train the undergraduates and then the postgraduates later on. And such things can be easily managed. Like Bombay have a trauma center, which is Sion Hospital, very famous. All trauma patients from all over the accidents and all, they come to Sion Hospital and they are separate. So such training or exposure should be given to all the people who are passing, because you go to rural places where there are less facilities, but nobody is there to train you properly that way. So training has to be put into the medical education, and all people who are passing, becoming doctors, they should know about all this disaster management training.
Right, they'll be able to handle the situation better. At this, I'd once again like to come to you, Dr. Time comes, everybody comes to help out, whether it's nationally, internationally. We're well aware of the fact that you two have been working internationally when it comes to helping victims of war. It takes a lot of courage to be out there in a war-torn zone, and you have very successfully been doing that over the years. Can you share a little about the guts, really, that one needs and the various challenges that you, along with the various teams of doctors who work at war zones, they have to deal with?
So we had an opportunity of working internationally as well, and I have been to war-torn countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Nigeria, and all four countries probably are terrorist-prone and war-prone. Iraq, we used to go when there was American army still in place. So that was 2007, 2008, 2009. And 2009, especially when American army was about to go. And that was a time when civil war was practically erupting, and we were there. It's really a challenge. You don't know language. Indians are quite respected in these countries. Let me be very, very candid about it. Be it Middle East in Iraq, be it Afghanistan, and be it Yemen. I was in Sana'a as well. These are countries where Indian doctors for so many years have earned so much of respect that the moment they say Hindi, and you said yes, Hindi, or maybe by our appearance they would say Hindi, they would really love you. And that is the beauty, because there would be international teams from United Nations which would be working. There would be teams from Americans and Europeans, but they would love to be treated by Indian doctors. And so when you work in these zones, you need to learn their language as well. So I can speak a bit of Arabic. I know a lot of Arabic medical terms, and I can talk in Arabic with them. And this actually creates that kind of comfort zone, because you are a foreign national and they have to believe you, they have to talk. And every time there was not a translator with you. So when you are there, there is a patient right in front. You have to ask him something, and there is no translator around. You can't wait for translator to come in. So you need to learn that language. You need to at least have in your bag 50 to 100 words. When you start speaking Arabic with them, you connect with them. So they feel that you are a part of them, and they can tell you their problems, and you can do that. So yes, internationally, this biggest challenge is interpersonal relationship, because you're coming from a foreign country, you need to come. Number two challenge, which is there is language barrier, which you need to be there. So if you are doing a relief somewhere in Africa, which is a French speaking predominantly, you need to have some words of French you should know. But in the Middle East or countries like Yemen, where you need to learn Arabic, or in Afghanistan, it was easier. Hindi is understood, but I know a bit of Farsi and Pashto, so which was also useful when you work mainly in Kabul. Kabul is a capital district, and Kabul was somewhere where Indians are loved like anything. They love Hindi songs, they see Indian movies,
Hollywood.
They like Indian doctors quite a lot. So working in this has got its own challenge, but it is also your own charisma. You feel that you are like a superstar there, because everybody is actually saluting you the moment you're moving out in the marketplace, or you are moving in the camps in between. So it's a love, affection, which gives you and which keeps you motivating to do it. But at the same time, being a war zone, hospitals are also not safe in these war zones. Some of the organizations which are into terror, they don't differentiate between a hospital and a government building. So they would actually go ahead and do bad acts on hospitals as well. And this happened in Baghdad. We were in a hospital, and just the building adjacent was also a pediatric hospital, and it was bombed right at 12 in the night with kids inside. So terrorists don't differentiate between a white flag which is there or a country flag. They would actually go ahead and attack sometimes the medical institutions also. And probably that is the most unfortunate thing which happens when you are on international expeditions, because most of the time you are not even insured.
Well, some very, very daunting experiences there. And here I'd like to rope in someone very special. She's the one who really conceptualized Alive. She's the one who brought Alive to life, really. Let me introduce to you Dr. Mamta Jain, Managing Director, Medwiz Healthcare, an entrepreneur, a leader in the healthcare communication industry, someone who's very, very passionate about everything she does in life. And Alive is no different. So, Dr. Jain, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome. Why don't you join us in this conversation and take it forward, please?
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Mamta Jain. Our viewers,
the admin is so fond of the doctors, they're not allowing me to start my video. So they're quite enjoying it, but just a sec, give me a moment. Yeah, so here I am. Thank you, Isha. Thank you so much. And what an insight that you've taken it across, and what Dr. Oberoi just mentioned. For every demons, we have angels, which are called as doctors during this stage. So you may have terrorists who may keep on bombing a pediatric hospital in the middle of the night, not thinking of the kind of death toll that they're going to have it across, the loss to humanity. We also have doctors who are operating 24/7. Waiting for a bottle of water, someone who's going to get it across from a kilometer run or something of that sort. Thank you so much for sharing those things. They are really, listening to them gives us goosebumps. But Dr. Oberoi, I would just want to nearby, and there is a calamity which happens, and maybe 50 kilometers or 20 kilometers. And if I need to be prepared for a traumatic situation, accident situation, natural calamity, anything of that sort, what is the kind of setup that I need to keep ready so as to when I go there and keep it across? This is more for all our surgeons and orthopedic surgeons who have their own standalone hospitals, and how can they be prepared to keep that kind of a movable infrastructure, which you think has to be there?
So I'll tell you what, Mamta, what is needed at that time is manpower. People are afraid to chip in and bring both their hands together to work. If you are a hospital, you are a standalone surgeon. You can't do whatever best you can. But you have a team of your own OT technicians, nurses, general duty assistants in the hospital. So each hospital has got a staff of around 20 on an average. If you train all of those 20, they become your arms. They would be more than happy to chip in. And as a team of 20 people who are trained into first aid, you can do wonders. What usually happens is that we are overt OT technicians, nurses, general duty like Safai Walas and general duty staff, they are not chipped in. It is usually what doctors, they go lead, they take their one assistant or two assistant, drive and go to the. It is actually, if you train and if you take time out of your schedule and just train your own staff on resuscitation, on putting an IV line, on doing dressings, on doing splintages, on taking blood pressure, even your Safai Wala is able to do that. He is going to help you in this disaster. So the best part of a standalone hospital is that the team is loyal. They have been observing you for maybe months and years together. They know you, how you are going to work. The only thing is that your commitment to train them for disaster management. And if you have arms and hands, resources are usually not a problem. When you reach to this, the resources are usually not a problem. It is the lack of hands, trained hands, which can do work. So my answer to this is that you really mobilize your own staff, because that's the best which you can do. And if you're more enthusiastic, you can actually do training sessions for young volunteers. So in railways, we were running what is called as territorial army. So I was a part of TA, which is territorial army. And territorial army is actually involved as a second line defense to the country. So whenever it happens, so we had Bharat Scouts and Guides, young kids who were scouts, and you just train them for first aid. And these scouts are there whenever disasters would happen. So volunteerism is something which is inherent in our system. The only thing is it just needs to be, one has to be aware and focus so that this volunteerism takes a shape And whenever disaster happens, everybody just chips in as a part of a team.
Thank you. I mean, that's very insightful. Dr. Suchak, you've been actually responsible in creating and mobilizing quite a lot of time these kind of a team, getting across all doctors on board, spreading across, getting the team that how Dr. Oberoi has highlighted, training your own staff. Can you share some experiences, how to go about it and how to take it across? And maybe some incident where you actually did it on hand.
See, for me, it was not difficult because I am running a hospital which is 70 bedded with staff of 130 people. So I have almost like 40 consultants attached and a good number of trained people who could, and in a way, they are always whenever such national calamity occurs. So, and I have always headed not even the local Malad Medical, but even Indian Medical Association. Or for me, getting doctors 30, 40, 50 is not a problem at all. And only thing is we have to get resources, get all, like 10, 15 vehicles, we all start living together. In few hours, we get together. And wherever the problems are, we try and reach them. And we have the advantage in our hospital, we have enough medical resources. So what we put in the ambulance, all those gadgets, drums, and, dressing materials and instruments. And then, we are in a way much better. All the IV fluids, Venflo cannulas, and all those things. So for us, and we have an ICU ambulance with a small ventilator. And we have ICU trained doctors also. So for us, it has been always easy for going anywhere. But only thing is at times, I remember when we went to Kutch, they had blocked the roads for going into the village. So I had to speak to the collector. And I had the context to go to otherwise you go with all those things and you are not allowed. And you will not believe, so many people are injured. So many lives are lost. In each family member, I was lost 1 or 2 or 3 family members. Or sometimes the whole family is gone. And at one time, after organizing all that, those dead people were removed, there were like hundreds of dead bodies lying. And they had to be given funeral. So we had to arrange a separate area with those local people there, to give that respect to the people but identify them with the local authorities. Because even the people working in the municipal corporation, local, everyone is, damaged with some, either their family member is lost. So there was no staff of the government, local government there. So it has been quite a difficult experience, learning experience. But in a couple of days, we started getting more help from the state government, from, Ahmedabad, and then gradually things were getting, a lot of NGOs joined, Rotary Club, and many other, and they were ready to do any work, absolutely. I remember when we went from here, so this Daisar, this is the first hot way. So we said, let's put all the fuel and all. The guy said, where are you going? So we said, we're going to Kutch for the earthquake. Nobody charged a single rupee for any fuels to be put in so many vehicles. And not only that, they had a shop, they opened up the shop. You want biscuits, this, that, water bottles, just take it. So every citizen is ready to help for such things. And it's an experience, I'm telling you. But working day in and day out, it's
tiring.
They're tiring, but you don't mind it. You get 2-3 hours sleep, you're fine. But again, where to sleep? Either tents or you sit in a car and which is away from some tree, because the jerks were continuing. It had not stopped. So it was an experience that way. And I'm telling you, this should be a part of medical syllabus. They have to be taught in education, the final MBBS and all. And when they're doing internship, they have to be posted with such, wherever there is calamity, they have to be sent for some training. That will help. And we need more paramedical staff also. What doctor mentioned, paramedical staff is also not easily available. And nobody wants to leave your own comfort zone of a city and go and, leave your family and go. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or day after. But it is very satisfying. Our life is to save somebody, to reduce somebody's pain. That is gift of life given to us, and we don't mind doing it all through our life. So there is no question about it.
Amazing, sir. So inspiring. So inspiring. Dr. Oberoi, but my whole thing is whenever there is a natural calamity which strikes in, it is in the first seconds and minutes. You don't have one or two patients coming in. You have hundreds of patients.
Hundreds of patients.
Okay. And now these could be lacerations to a severe concussions, to multiple fractures, to internal bleeding. How do you triage? What would you want people listening to you, both of you, if you could just highlight it? How are you going to put across as a system that, okay, is there a system where someone is looking into it, triaging it, some serious stability? Those are when you face it, how do you go about it?
So what happens, Dr. Mamta, is that one of the member becomes a team leader. He is the guy who is usually a senior guy, who has a lot of clinical acumen, because you don't have appliances there to understand who is serious and who is not. And there the clinical acumen would come. So senior most person of the team is a team leader, and he is actually entrusted to triage. In a triage, the basic thing is whoever is younger, whoever can be revived, whoever needs urgent attention has to be given first. Wherever you think probably putting in a lot of effort, resources might not help, it becomes second criteria. And that's how it happens. It might look unfair, but that's how it happens.
But that's a fact.
That's a part of, because you have to save those who you think you will be able to save. And you have to let them go where you think you actually won't be able to. Somebody who's got more than 80% burns, and somebody who is young, who has got mangled extremities in a hypovolemic shock. You know you are able to save this guy shock in 10 minutes and you will be able to save him. For the other, probably you will be putting a lot of resources and still you won't be able to save. So that's triaging. And that is why this is the most important responsibility which is given to the senior most person, who is called TL, or the team leader. Team leader will then certainly, the moment the patient starts to come, he will triage the patient and then appoint everybody depending upon where the first aid has to be given, to whom you have to intervene fast and do it, to the entirety. So I think triaging, as you rightly pointed out, is most important. And all the efforts and resources are actually spent to those who have got grievous injuries, serious injuries, but they need first aid attention, and they have an option that if we give in that golden minute or golden hour, we are able to save them. There are people who have got minor injuries, they need to wait. Even for small dressings, they would need to wait, maybe for some hours as well. But then there are also very, very serious older subgroup of patients where probably intervening and spending a lot of resources is unfair, because then you are putting all the attention to that side and getting younger, salvageable human beings neglected. So triaging is most important thing which happens. It's a part of curriculum of MBBS as well. But as I think Dr. Anil rightly said, till the time you are out triage work and how much it is useful and effective to save during this disaster.
Now, coming down to with that, thing is that when you set up an operation theatre and OT which you have both have done and worked across tremendously in that, have experience onto it, especially in earthquakes and where the injuries are more than you need to operate. And with these OTs are like open air, not like our traditional, not with a good light source, everything that we are so used to doing it in OT. How do you manage? What are those challenges? You want to take it across with you? Both of you. I would want to hear both of your opinion, Dr. Oberoi and then Dr. Suchet.
No electricity. Usually, you usually work on, if it is a village, either torch lights or lanterns, you would do operation. These are open theatres. Privacy is also an issue because there are sometimes female patients. So you need to put a bit of curtains around and start working. Sterility is very, very compromised. It's not a sterile condition. But when you are on a war footing and when you are managing like that, probably these things take a back. It's important to put the patient's life first and then extremity later on. So you need to revive them by putting fluids, getting their blood pressure back. stopping the bleeding which is happening. You won't believe, we had to do amputations there itself without actually being able to transfer. It's a mangled leg which is hanging like this. The patient is getting sick moment later moment. You just can't bandage and send him for another 3 hours journey with this leg. So whatever local anesthesia you can inject around, you have to amputate the leg, clean that area, dress it, stabilize, and then shift. So with local anesthesia, with whatever limited resources, because anesthetist is a big asset there. If you have an anesthetist, you are very, very lucky. But if you don't have an anesthetist, you yourself have to become something like an intensivist. You have to put IV lines yourself, put locks for anesthesia. It's a painful thing. And do whatever best you could do. But if you have an anesthetist in your team around, dynamics much better, and he's able to help the patients much better. But then these are resources. Whatever is given to you, whatever is there, you would go ahead and do it. And that is why collaboration between the tents and it becomes important, because you come to know there is a lady doctor there and you do have a pregnant lady, fallen doctor. So you can actually then chip in and resources and start working like that. So things happen like that. It's a very dynamic scenario. Keeps on changing every moment. How things happen, it just keeps on changing.
Dr. Souchak, both as a team leader and someone who has so much of experience in setting up operation theatres like that.
I am an anesthetist and an intensivist. For me, it was easy as a team leader to differentiate which patients are serious, which needs more attention, which is less. Go to the OT, this guy can go to the ward, this guy can be managed out in the tent. So all those IV lines have to be put and all those things I could manage. This guy will need blood, arrange for the blood. So all those things we would, and we had to set up only 1 or 2 OTs. You need to set up 5 OTs. How do you do that? So in ordinary room, you have to arrange on, there are no proper operation table. So you have to arrange on the bed without, the height is not proper. And people have to work in all difficult and different situations. And I'm telling you, it's a very challenging jobs. But first is what doctor mentioned. I totally agree with you. Okay? We don't think of sterility. We save the life first. Once you save the life, then better antibiotics can be given later on to clear the infection. Because it's not possible to make those good OTs or good hospital these things. And even antibiotics, we don't get the higher antibiotics. We get the basic antibiotics. And lot many places, even all those intravenous antibiotics were not available. IV bottles got over. So it becomes very, very difficult at times. And but it's an experience. It changes every hour. There's no question about it. But we manage somehow. And we may have lost patients also. It's not we haven't lost patients. But whatever best we could do to save many lives, and if somebody is destined, we're not able to help everybody. But I would say government needs to do much more in our country, because I'm not against any government. The system has to spend more money on health issues. It's not enough. It's not 1 or 2% of your budget is nothing. You need to spend some 7-8% of something like that, because it's going to save lives. And now we see during this COVID emergencies, so many. First of all, this is a new disease. We are all learning the new symptoms, the mutations, everything. Every day we are learning something. And city like Delhi and Bombay is overwhelmed with the number of patients. I have good number of contacts and good affording nice people who don't get a bed, oxygen bed. What do you do? So difficult. Last 3 months were the worst. The second phase. First phase we were able to manage, but the second phase, I'm pained at my heart. You want to help people, you're not able to help people. how many beds extra somebody will put for you. So it has been like. But I think, let us see, after good vaccination, if we are able to prevent the third wave or make the third wave milder, which can be managed. And in the meantime, we need to increase all over. See now what has happened is this black fungus, mucus mycosis has started. Still we are not able to. See, steroids we have been using for years and years. Last year also we used, but those people have not got it. But either it has come from the industrial oxygen which has been. Everyone is learning, and there is shortage of drugs also. We are all requesting the companies to manufacture drugs faster, and they are available for treatment. I'm sure the government must be working on this day in and day out.
Yes, so rightly said. And Isha, don't you think it's such an emotional aspect that, when they are there on the field, and especially with man-made calamities, natural calamities, operating onto it. I mean, what do you think about the emotional aspect? What do you want to ask, Isha? Because I am quite overwhelmed listening to this.
Dr. Jain, that is exactly what my next question was going to be, and I'd like to ask this question to Dr. Oberoi. How do you keep your emotions in check? Listening to you, listening to all your stories, we've been getting so many comments from our viewers of all these touching moments. So we want to know from you, how is it a challenge to separate your emotions and keeping your professional front at the beginning? So how do you work in such dire situations with a solid heart?
I think, Isha, the secret is that the training which you undergo during your post-graduation, it's itself very rigorous training. We work continuously 24, 48 and sometimes 72 hours at stretch with small breaks. So working hard is probably not a difficult scenario. Also in your post-graduation, you tend to be in ER and work through the trauma teams for hours together. So probably that builds us to such kind of emotional strength that you are able to cope up. The issue is lack of resources, and sometimes makes you frustrated when you are at periphery where you are without your routine comfort zone, your own technician, your OT staff, nobody's around. So that is a crisis. But the run-through emotions which are happening at the war zone or the crisis area puts your adrenaline to such an height that you actually put things on side. And probably brain just not even think about it. You just keep on working. We remember we were in ER during our training in a medical institution, and around 100 kilometers far away from our medical college, there is a city where young kids were having their annual function of the school, and there were around 300 kids with their parents in a small town. The function was happening in a tent. The tent roof got burnt, and it was made up of plastic material, and then burning tent roof fell down on kids. Almost everybody in that village lost some near dear, and these kids were evacuated from that area. That's called Mandi Dabwali, close in Haryana, and they were brought to us in ER, and we were training in orthopedics. But then for 3 nights consecutively, for 3 nights and days, we had to do lot of burn treatment because everybody was burnt. All kids were burnt, their parents were burnt. And these kind of trainings, which probably Dr. Anil also pointed out, during your post-graduation, would put you into triage, would put you how you actually go ahead and manage specialty, which is far beyond your own specialty. You become intensivist, you become surgeon, you become a burn specialist on the trauma unit itself. These things and the training itself brings you to a level where whenever disaster happens and you are called in for, it is probably just switch off mind and you are all tuned to take care of disaster. Nothing very special which is going to
So, like we discussed earlier, that disaster management training is very, very vital, especially now that we have so many more joining in the profession. Thank you for that. And here I'd like to inform all of you, we are getting a lot of questions for both our doctors from our audience members. We'll be taking those in a couple of minutes. So I'd like to request all our viewers, in case you have more questions, please do send them right away, because we are now heading to our next question to Dr. Suchak. So you mentioned how we need to invest so much. Same time, we feel, in spite of proving time and again, working endless hours, working towards the benefit of patients, we have very, very often seen that frontline workers, doctors, our health workers are not given the due for their work. They're not given the credit if they're unable to save a life. Like you said, you want to save as many lives as you can. You want to help as many patients as you can. But a lot of times we feel that doctors are not given the due credit, even though we are in gratitude of all the good that you do. What do you have to say about that?
See, Isha, we do our best to save a patient, but sometimes, in spite of all our efforts, we still lose the patient. So we always say it's God's will. We can't help each and every person. So it's not possible to satisfy, but you have to spend. See, in our training, what we do, okay, we should be able to break the news to the relatives. Somebody, you lose a patient. It's very, very important to do little grief counseling. You have to spend some time with them, sit down with them, explain to them, first understand them, and then gradually release the information, what has happened, what you did, how you tried, and So that is the way we can reduce. Otherwise, it's not possible. But you need that training also. See, when I passed in 70s. At that time, we were grief counseling and how to break the news for we lose a patient. So we learn all that during our experience and practice. And I always believe, and I say at times, I treat, he cures. Because I have faith in God and faith in the universe. So you have to do your best, otherwise, So medically, what do, what is available. But at times, we don't, 90% we may succeed, 10% we don't.
Where I would really want to agree, and with Dr. Suchak. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do Alive is everywhere that there is a calamity, right from COVID to everyone, a train accident or anything, earthquake, the news is always focused either on politicians or stars who've donated a little bit here and there. No one ever focuses on the hard work, which not just doctors or paramedics, also majorly doctors who guide them and take it across, who drive such initiatives. There's not even one single talk in the media which is ever done about the hard work each one of them put in, right from the studying days, that how Dr. IPS pointed out, that you're putting it 3 days and saving kids, and though it's not your specialty, every day, right from the time that they get up to go to sleep, whether they manage 72 hours or more without sleep or barely any sleep and limited resources, taking those difficult situations and decisions, whom to save and not to save. Never ever the media ever highlights the doctor with a kind of a country has to recognize the kind of a work which each one of them puts in. It's time that we moved away and put the spotlight on the real stars and not politicians or the so-called stars. I don't like to call them stars. That's it. That's exactly. Now, one of the difficult questions, Dr. Suchak and Dr. IPS, I would have to ask you is, lot of doctors who want to be a part of any of these things are sometimes scared of the medico-legal aspect. Like the difficult situation that I've taken it across, or surgery, I have amputated that person's thing. It was a difficult call that I had to take it across. What is the law? What is the protection? What it is, Dr. Oberoi and Dr. Suchak? Dr. Oberoi, first to you.
I think medico-legally in a disaster, you are the best bet. You don't even need consents around because you can give a consent yourself. Emergency is something which gives you authority to do whatever you are there on spot. So I would actually ask everybody who is actually chipping in for such kind of disaster management not to be afraid of any medical legal implications, any for that matter, because you are on the spot, and if in the right conscience you have taken a decision, you stand by that decision, it's not being challenged medical legally anymore. So just don't worry about it, because you are doing a selfless service with whatever facility is available there, and you are taking the right choice which your mind gives you. And in an emergency scenarios, there can't be more than one scenario. There is just one scenario where you have to go ahead and do it. So you just go ahead and do it. So no medical legal implications. And I think our judiciary is also mature enough to understand that in such scenarios, whatever has been done in the interest of patient is something which is to be protected medical legally as well. So in so many years where we have attended a lot of these disasters, accidents, no medical legal implications ever happened to us. And I think our Indian judiciary is mature enough to understand that this is an area where probably the decision of the first responder has to be respected, and court is going to uphold.
Dr. Suchik, your views on it?
I would like to add one more thing. The Epidemic Act itself safeguards you, safeguards the doctor. See, in such situations, which is very, very rare, everyone is thinking of one's own life, number one. Number two, doctor is putting his life at risk to save somebody's life. So I think people who are closely associated at the time of emergency, they realize what doctors are working. So we don't get any medical legal cases during all such floods or earthquakes or, such emergencies. I get railway accidents also regularly because my hospital is very close to the station. So all the railway accidents which occur nearby are brought to my hospital. Then we do whatever orthopedic emergencies are required, or brain surgeries are required, that is taken care of. So that is a medical legal, but nobody bothers you for, as a doctor is sued for such a thing. So I think even if you at times our chief minister or prime minister, at least they have always mentioned frontline workers, doctors and paramedics, people are working for so long, so many hours. It's not easy. It's not easy. And today you understand people in COVID with those PPE kits to work for 6 hours or 8 hours without drinking a glass of water, or you can't go to the toilet to, So it's not easy. And you get dehydrated when you come out of it. Then you are supposed to take bath and take care of your family. A lot of people stayed in the hotel or somewhere else, guest house.
Yes.
And because they always worry about their parents or their children, they get infected from them. So much devotion and dedication doctors are working. It's unbelievable. It's very nice.
Wow, that's really, really inspiring. One case, Dr. Oberoi, over so many years, which is still stirs you up emotionally. I mean, I refuse to believe the cases don't stir emotionally.
Many, not one actually. But
there are many. So
accident, and I think that was the initial part when I was attending a railway accident. And probably you are naive, you are young, you still have more emotions than. And we were retrieving a small kid from a bogie which had overturned, and his leg was crushed in between. And we were unable to retrieve that child out. And his leg was actually stuck from just above the knee. And we could see that there is no blood circulation. He was stuck there for hours together, and the gangrene was actually setting in. We were not able to retrieve. We had to amputate his leg. Hanging there. He was hanging, we were holding there. And our anesthetist gave him some sedation. We had to amputate his leg there then to take him out. So sometimes you have to actually
do things with
the leg to survive. We had to amputate and then hold the dressing and bleeding and then chucked him out. We couldn't have left him like that. There was no mechanical way of releasing that bogie, cutting that compartment to retrieve that leg out. And sometimes you have to take a hard call, and This guy was maybe 6 or 7. And he had actually gone tired of weeping also. He stopped crying. He was just not even crying then, because he had been crying for hours together. We just had to amputate and get it out. We were able to save him. That's the best part. He became handicapped, but we were able to save his life, and I think that's
This was how many years back?
21, I believe.
Oh, God.
It's quite a bad 21 years, yes.
And you still get emotional thinking your eyes have watered just even.
You see, whenever you are a bit younger, your memory stayed longer. When you become a bit more older, you start forgetting things. And sometimes these memories leave bigger impressions in your mind, especially when you are exposed at that age. So it was a call which we had to take. We were all alone, and we had nobody to look forward. Sir, kya karna chahiye? What should we do? So it was a call entirely taken by yourself to save a life, and you are responsible for everything which you are doing. So probably that leaves a far bigger impression in your mind. Now things don't matter too much, because probably world has taught you so many things. But 21 years before, it was a different ballgame.
I think what has happened over a period of years, you've not, like, these memories have taught you that a lot of things are not in your hand.
True.
To look, that perspective has come in. Dr. Souchak, sir.
For me, life-changing experience was when I was an intern in 1978, and I was coming back from my rural internship, and somewhere near Andheri, I had a very bad fatal road accident. Absolutely, my spleen had ruptured. I was in hypotension. I was asked to be taken to the Cooper Hospital. I requested the taxi driver to take me to my own Souchak Hospital. When we reached here, my blood pressure had dropped to almost 40. They took me immediately to the operation theatre. This is 1978. And on the table, I had a cardiac arrest. I was revived on the table. My spleen was removed. They had given me something like 10 to 12 bottles of blood. And that time I realized that God has given me a second life, and it has a meaning and purpose. Somebody or help to save a life, that becomes my motto of all my life. And this was a very, very life-changing experience. And I have tremendous conviction about it. Okay, life is all about what we can do for others. And being a doctor, it's a tremendous satisfaction what you get. It's unbelievable. When you come home after saving a life or, reducing somebody's pain, and so it's very satisfying. Okay, God, has helped me today. So, but whenever I go for emergency patients, this is something out of the medical listing. I always believe God is my partner. I remember God and I attend to serious patients. It helps me tremendously. And a lot of patients are saved. And this is whatever, it's a belief, but it has helped me tremendously. Okay, universe is helping me.
So much to learn today. One, both of you have given enough insight. From a scientific perspective for our listening doctors, if I had to summarize it across, more attention to be paid across for the training of your staff, building it across so that as a team that they can stand up in case of eventuality. More focus to be paid by the government and authorities to actually building on trauma. Passion drives it all. So even if there is lack of resources or something, it's a call of duty, which is where everyone is taking it across. Triage is one of the most important part of it. Knowing whom you can save, whom you can't save. Focusing on someone younger, where the energy spent on them is going to be taking it across, not being emotional about it. I think those are the few key points which I'm sure the doctors listening to us will want to take it across. Over to you, Isha. Isha, you're on mute.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Mamta Jain. The way you summarized all that we've discussed today, the way Dr. Anil Souchak, Dr. Oberoi have really shared all the work that they've done over the years. I must say that anecdote brought tears to my eyes, and I'm sure it so did for our viewers. We've been getting so many messages from our viewers. So thank you both for this very, very candid conversation. Your schedules are very, very demanding. Your work as doctors are emotionally and physically very taxing. We can't thank both of y'all enough for joining us to this conversation, which has been an eye-opener of sorts. And really, Dr. Mamta Jain, for bringing to us alive, because this has given us a new life of hope to look forward to. Dr. Jain, before we close formally, I want to ask you, can our viewers look forward to more sessions and segments of Alive?
Oh, absolutely. Isha, Alive had been there in my mind for quite some time. Whenever, and it started across, whenever I used to listen to the violence against doctors and all of it happening. And I really felt the problem was that too many good things are happening by the doctors' fraternity. And that good stories are never brought across to normal people, to everyone. Going forward, this is the first one, but I would like to ask all the experts. I mean, even today in the audience, we have a doctor from Indore, and he's put across that he was also the part of Bhuj, and he operated quite a bit from. So, I mean, such stories have started coming in, and this is what, and, interestingly, he said he operated 250 surgeries for 4 days. I mean, so when I look into these kind of opinion coming from Dr. Souchak, Dr. Oberoi, India and doctors in India are full of these stories. There are so many. Everyone would have a story like that. And these are the stories which need to be brought across. The real heroes, the acts of daily heroism that is done by them. When the morning round starts and the surgery starts at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and a midnight emergency at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock is attended, these are acts of daily heroism. Taking decisions how a person is saved. And we from medical fraternity have to do that. I'm sure with Alive, we will continue with this series, have more interesting, various specialities, and learning from each one of them, each one's experience, so that we can bring it across more to the people. Thank you so much, Isha, for everything. Thank you, Dr. Souchak.
Thank you.
Very, very insightful. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Dr. IPS. Thank you so much for all of that. Over to you, Isha.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mamta Jain. As you very rightly mentioned, these stories need to be shared, which is why Alive will continue with all these beautiful lineups coming up for our viewers. At this point, I'd also like to bring in Yatin once again from the entire team of Lupin, who put in so much of hard work, the entire team of Medwiz, who's made sure that Alive is all about bringing to you real heroism. Yatin, what do you have to say? What do you think of the session, our speakers, our audience comments? It's been a very exciting evening for us.
Oh, Isha, I mean, I guess the way Mamta Madam said that our technical guy is so into it, he's not okay. It was like the most inspiring 2.5 hours of my life I've ever heard anyone like this. I was never inspired so much. And when I was listening to what even Dr. Oberoi was saying and Dr. Souchak was saying, and when Oberoi was discussing that case of that small child, there's only one thought which came to my mind, that in this entire world, no one can bring back that person who has crossed that line of death. But for all those who are standing on that, doctor is the only one who can bring him back, and that to all. So a big, salute to all the doctors for this heroic act.
Thank you so much, Yatin. And at this point, I'd once again like to thank Dr. Suchak, Dr. Oberoi for joining us, Yatin and the entire team at Lupin, Mr. Sachdeva for starting on that very, very high note. And of course, the entire team at Medwiz Healthcare, creating Alive and bringing it to our viewers. A big thank you to Dr. Mamta Jain and her entire team. And before we say goodnight to all of you, I'd like to request our viewers, doctors from across the nation who joined us this evening, to please share their comments, their feedback with us. And it's been an absolute delight bringing Alive for you. So on behalf of the entire team at Medwiz Healthcare, this is Isha Bhalla signing off, wishing you some beautiful stories of positivity forward. Thank you for joining us.